So most of you I see are saying B, that is correct. That's where the rains are more scarce because the air is already cold. It doesn't have any more moisture, therefore it's not gonna rain there. So that's the answer, B. So before I go over this, let's just review what we covered so far. So what was the first thing we went over? What was the first thing I covered? You guys want to help me out? We talked about where the planet Earth is in the solar system. That's going to determine, so that determines weather / seasons. What's next thing that we discussed?
We discussed about North, Equator, and South Pole.
So we talked about the sunlight, how the angle of sun's rays hit planet Earth, or how planet Earth is going to face the sun, either or. Next thing was spinning of the Earth, which is going to cause movement of air and water, and then air moves water. And then affects the temperature around the planet. And then last thing was moving off the oceans. That's how water is moving. Temperature around. And it's going to determine the ecosystem, which is biotic factors. And abiotic are going to be something like water, temperature, weather. So those are some examples. That's what we covered.
Non-livings.
What happened, George?
Abiotic stands for non-livings.
Yes, that's non-living. This is living. Okay, so next thing I'm going to tell you is, I already told you that you find deserts at 30° north and 30° south. Now that's because there's no more water left, there's no more rain. Now that's not the only reason where you find the deserts. So next thing I'm going to tell you about is something that's called rain shadow. Maybe some of you already heard about this. So when the air is coming from the ocean that has moisture, so imagine maybe this air is coming from the Pacific Ocean and it's blowing inland, and then all of a sudden it hits the Sierra Nevadas. So it hits the Sierra Nevada, and as the air goes up, it's gonna get cold because there's this tall mountain here. The air has to go up now, and as it goes up, it's gonna get cold. And I already said that cold air cannot hold moisture, therefore it's going to rain down. So it's going to rain down and it's gonna lose all the moisture. So as it goes up the mountain, it gets colder and it loses some moisture. It's going to rain there, or it's gonna form a snow cap on the mountains. And then it's going to be really nice, but there's going to be a lot of vegetation, nice and lush on this side. But then this air, once it goes over the mountain, now it doesn't have any more moisture. So it lost the moisture in form of rain here or snow cap here, and it's going to be dry on the other side. And that's called rain shadow. It's dry climate on the other side. So this you're going to find deserts on the other side of mountain range, and that's due to the fact that mountain range sucks all the moisture out of this hot air, and it gets cold once it crosses. There's no more moisture left, therefore it doesn't rain, and that's going to form a desert. So this is what you find up down California or Mexico. If you see tall mountains, on the other side of the mountain you're gonna see there's deserts. So that's another reason why deserts are produced, not just 30° north and 30° south, but the mountain ranges also contribute to the production of deserts. This is called rain shadow. So that was about the climate. Next thing, we're going to talk about this model. This is a model. So model is artificial representation of a real life. You can have a model of a car, you can have a model of a train. And this reminds me of the San Francisco Bay model. Have you guys seen that? You guys seen San Francisco Bay model? It's called the Bay model. This is miniature version of San Francisco Bay. So this is miniature version of that. It takes the size of maybe 1.5, 2 football fields. You can go visit this, so the admission is free, but at the end they ask for some donation. So they made this model to figure out which way water is moving, which way water currents are moving. So if there was an oil spill, where is that going to end up? If it's going to end up in Oakland or Alameda or maybe Fremont. So they created this model to see how the water was moving, and it's pretty detailed. So if you are interested, you can go look at it. So nowadays we have computers that can make models. You can use all the algorithms, it's more advanced, and then computers can make models for us. And we can use those models to predict things. So this model here, it predicts where you find all these different ecosystems. Where do you find deserts? Where do you find tropical rainforests? Where do you find savanna? So we can use these models to kind of see where you're going to find different ecosystems. This model here is looking at 2 variables. It's looking at the rain, annual participation, the amount of rain the place receives, and it's looking at the temperature. And it's going, the deserts are going from 32 all the way, maybe up to here a little bit, even after 0, or you could say 32 0. So this is showing you different biomes, different ecosystems. And then I already told you that Antarctica is desert. It hasn't rained there or snowed there in a long time. So it's considered a desert. So this is where Antarctica would be. So on the exam, this is what I want you to know. I can give you this chart. I can tell you the rain here. I can put this another variable, temperature here. Then I can leave this blank. I can say A, B, C, D here. And then I will ask you, where do you find the desert? Where do you find savanna? Where do you find temperate forest? Where do you find tropical rainforest? So try to memorize this. Try to memorize the temperature and the participation that place receives. So I will give you this model on the exam. And this model is looking at 2 factors only, temperature and moisture. And that's going to determine the type of plants are dominant in each location. If it's a desert, you might see a lot of cactus plants or the ones that don't require water. If it's tropical rainforest, then you're going to see that type of plants or that type of vegetation. And then depending on the type of vegetation is there, it's going to impact the type of organisms that you find there, living organisms. So that's ecosystems. Now I already said that this model is looking at two variables. It's not that easy in real life. They can add more variables. Maybe they can add latitude. They can add latitude as another variable. They can add altitude. So you can add more variables, and that's going to make the model a little bit more complicated, but that's how it is in real life. It's not easy. It's not this easy. You just look at 2 things and then you're like, oh, that's it. For same thing for the population model we looked at, you can't just look at birth and death. You also have to look at immigration, migration, and emigration. So all those different factors. So these are the land biomes. This is what you find on land. Your book also goes over biomes in the aquatic system or aquatic biomes. So biomes are ecosystems with distinctive communities of life. You'll find certain type of plant species, certain type of organisms, depending on the rain and the temperature there in that area. And these are the aquatic biomes. I'm not going to go into detail for the aquatic biome. Your book does spend some time on it, but we don't have that much time. And it's general bio, it's intro bio class. So aquatic biomes are underwater environments or halfway in water environments, so such as coral reefs. mangroves, tide pools, and maybe waterfalls here, glaciator lakes, and freshwater lakes. So this is going to give you different community of organisms compared to these land biomes. So these aquatic biomes have different organisms that are living in them. And that's all I'm going to say about the aquatic biomes. I'm not going into detail for this. So there are aquatic biomes and there are land biomes, and different organisms live in those places. Okay, so we are done with the abiotic factors. We are going to move into community ecology next. So there's this chart. This goes over the type of relationships the species might have. You probably already know some of these, and some of these we will, go over today, and then you'll know about them. Now this chart here, so I recommend that you memorize this chart. So memorize this chart, and it's showing different type of interactions, and then it has plus, minus, or zero. Plus means that organism is benefiting, minus means the organism is getting harmed, and then zero means it's not benefiting or harming. So it's neither. So there's no gain or loss. If it's a negative, you lose something. If it's positive, you gain something. First one we have is competition. And I want you to notice for competition, it has negative for both species. So competition happens when two or more species try to obtain the same limited resource, maybe food. You can see the birds fighting here. Now, here competition has the negative for both of the species, and then you might say, oh, if they're competing, one might win. So why not? It's positive and negative. Now imagine maybe two boxers are fighting. One wins and the other one loses. But the one that wins, and he ends up with a black eye. He's all tired. He lost lots of energy, and he maybe ended up with a wound that can potentially kill him. So competition, when two species are competing, they're both losing on energy. So that's the reason it's negative for both of the species, even though one might get something out of it. But then again, that species had to spend lots of energy, lots of effort to do the competition. So in nature, competing over something is the last resort. So you shouldn't fight. Even for humans, you shouldn't fight ever. You have tried to find another way, but that's the last resort. Even in nature, that's the last resort, because both of the species are losing something. In this picture here, we have painter's mussel and we have zebra mussel. You can see the stripes on this. That's why it's called zebra mussel. So this painter's mussel is really big in size. But this zebra mussel is smaller in size, but it can reproduce really, really fast. So what it can do, it's going to reproduce really fast, and eventually it's going to cover this painter's mussel, and it's going to smother it. Now, when that happens, that's called competitive exclusion principle. The species that wins will have the resources, in this case, zebra mussel, and the species that loses, painter's mussel, now it can either move on to a different niche, it can find different food, or it can go extinct. So the less successful species eventually dies out, or it has to move into a new zone. It gets pushed into a new zone, or it's gonna go extinct. So that's the reason competition is really bad, because it can cause some of the species to go extinct. So that's called competitive exclusion principle. Now, because I already said that two species cannot be living in the same space and feeding on the same things, because one of them is going to eventually go extinct. If that happens, now, how come some of the species, how come sometimes multiple species are living in the same space? So here we have these penguins. So sometimes multiple species with the similar requirements coexist in the same habitat. Why do you think that might be? How is that possible if we have something that's called competitive exclusion principle? So how come sometimes multiple species can exist in the same habitat? Anybody wants to answer that?
Is it that they kind of have this understanding, or kind of,
They what?
is it understanding, like having understanding, or
Having understanding.
yes, same
Different.
on
So Kaylin said that they have different food supply. So that is possible. Sometimes some species they can tweak, even though these are the same species of penguins living in the same space, this light yellow and this orange, they're living in the same space, but they can tweak their diets a little bit. So they have similar diets. Sometimes they can tweak their diets a little bit. Another thing is they might be active, they might be feeding at a different time of year. So this red species and this orange species, they're feeding at the same time of the year, but they're not living in the same space. They live in the different space. Light yellow and orange species, they're living in the same space, but they're active at the different time of the year. So they feed on different times of the year. So that's how they can exist in the same place. That's something that's called resource partitioning instead of competitive exclusion. So that allows, resource partitioning allows multiple species to exist in the same place. So competition can result into competitive exclusion, or it can result in resource partitioning. Now, anybody thinking about going into restaurant business? Maybe opening a coffee shop? No? So let's just say that you were to open a coffee shop. Would you open it next to Starbucks? No, because you're gonna get crushed. Now, what you can do, you can maybe sell something a little bit different. Maybe they sell coffee, you can sell maybe ice cream with coffee or something like that, or coffee ice cream. So you can change that a little bit, or you can choose a different place to open the coffee shop. Because otherwise, one business, in this case, Starbucks is a better competitor, you're going to go out of business. So when you go to the mall, when you go to the food court, you're going to notice they have one pizza place, they have one hamburger place. They don't have two pizza places because one of them is going to do really good, the other one is going to go out of business. So what they are doing, they're doing resource partitioning. So they are sharing the space, but they are selling something different. So that's resource partitioning versus competitive exclusion. It's going to push one species completely out of that zone, or it's going to go extinct. So they're two different things. So we were talking about competition. Again, it's negative on both of the species. Next thing we have is symbiosis. Symbiosis, I want you to write down what symbiosis means. Symbiosis simply means living together. Sometimes students confuse it with mutualism. Mutualism is when two species are benefiting from each other. That's not what symbiosis means. Symbiosis means they're living together. They can be benefiting each other, they can be harming each other, they can have no effect on each other, but symbiosis just means living together. And we have three types of symbiosis. We have mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So again, symbiosis only and only means to live together. It doesn't mean if they're benefiting, it doesn't mean they're harming each other. They're just living together and affecting each other. Okay, so here is an example of mutualism. A mutualistic relationship improves the fitness of both partners, means they both benefit from each other. That's mutualism. Here we have acacia tree. This acacia tree allows these ants to live on it. Not just that, it also makes these little houses. It also makes these little houses where the ants can live. So these little thorns. And then it also makes some fruit for the ants to eat. Now, why is it doing that? So they did an experiment where they put a gel here, and then the ants couldn't get to the leaves. So when the ants were excluded, the leaves got eaten by those herbivores or insects. So the tree is encouraging the ants to live on it by providing it place to live, by giving it food. And in return, the ants are protecting the tree from all the herbivores, which is going to increase the reproductive success of the tree. So ants live on a plant, eating nectar produced by the plant. So the ants are getting place to live, ants are getting food. In return, the plant is getting protection from the herbivores and also better reproductive success. So that's a mutualistic relationship. That's an example. There are lots of examples of mutualistic relationship in nature.
Can I come up with one?
Yes.
It's just like when you have lots of rodents or rats in your house and you buy a cat, you will be feeding the cat, you know, baiting the cat, then the cat in return will be killing those rats for you.
Yeah, that could work. But we want to look at two species affecting each other, then that would be three, because the rodents are not really benefiting. You are benefiting, and then maybe cats getting food, but the third species is getting harmed, which is rodents. I don't know if you guys heard
Okay,
about that
interesting.
fish, the tiny fish that clean this big fish, they get some food out of it, but the other fish gets cleaned. That's another example of mutualistic relationship. Have you guys heard about that? Yes. Okay. Next thing we have is commensalism. This picture here is the mites, skin mites, hair mites. They live there. They don't really harm you. There are some that can cause some skin infections, but you don't even notice they're there. So in commensalism, one species can benefit and the other one is not affected at all. Now, because and so this is an example of arachnoid. This is skin mite, lives in hair follicles, consumes maybe dead skin cells or oil secretions, but it's asymptomatic, means it doesn't affect the host because it's only eating dead stuff. As a microbiologist, I could say that there's bacteria living on your skin, staph epidermidis, and it's not harming you. It's just residing there and maybe eating on your dead skin. And if we remove it, then maybe other harmful bacteria can grow in its place. So it is kind of beneficial to you having the bacteria there. And if the bacteria is getting something back, then it's mutualistic relationship, otherwise it's commensalism. So commensalism can have positive and zero, which means one species is getting benefit, is benefiting, and the other one is not affected at all. Or commensalism can have 0-0, where both of the species are not affecting each other, they're just living together. So it can be +0 or 0-0. That's still commensalism. Next one we have is parasitism. So one species is benefiting at the expense of the other. We looked at this before. Elephantitis, roundworms cause this disease, and this parasite takes energy away from the host. Therefore, it's benefiting, but the host is getting harmed. Another thing I want to mention, that parasite don't want to kill the host. That's the last thing any parasite wants to do, because once the host dies, it's not going to have anything to live off of. So that's the last thing the parasite wants to do. But if there's nothing left, then eventually it is going to kill the host. But it's going to try to keep the host alive as long as possible, because then it can feed off of the host for a long time. So an example of that would be this wasp. So this wasp, hornet, it finds itself a critter or a caterpillar, and then it stings the caterpillar, paralyzes it, and then it lays eggs on it. So once it's paralyzed, it can get away, and then it lays eggs on it. Then it can tuck away the caterpillar in maybe some hole, and then the baby wasps, they start to eat the caterpillar from inside. These baby wasps, they start to eat the caterpillar from inside, but they start eating the non-vital organs first. So maybe they start with the muscle first. You don't really need muscle. Then they eat the intestines. Then they eat other body parts, and then at the end they're going to get to the vital body parts, which is the heart and the brain. So the parasite in this case is trying to keep the whole host alive as long as possible. By the time it ends up eating the brain and the heart, once the host dies, it's ready to transform into adult. So now it can go and lay eggs on another caterpillar. So that's an example of parasitism. So it doesn't have the host anymore, but now it's already grown and it can go infect another caterpillar maybe. So that's parasitism. And it's going to have, parasitism is going to have negative effect on one species and positive on the other. In this case, the wasps are getting food from the caterpillar, so they are benefiting, but the caterpillar is dying, so it's harming the host. Next two we have is herbivory and predation. These are really easy to understand. So herbivory is eating plants, but if an insect eats plant, the plant can grow back. So that's herbivory. Predation is when the predator eats the prey dies. There's no coming back from that. Whereas herbivory, you can eat plants, but the plants can grow back. So an example of that would be if you eat lettuce, romaine lettuce, you can replant it. You can just cut the leaves, eat those, chop out the leaves, and you can stick the base in some water. Then you can leave it in the sunlight for some time, and it's gonna start growing back. That's an example of herbivory. Sometimes plants grow back even more vigorously after being eaten by maybe insects or after herbivory. Whereas predators, once they eat the prey, eat the entire prey, the predator wins, but the prey dies, and the prey can't come back from that. So that's the coevolution or the evolutionary arms race is a lot more stronger between predator and prey, because prey has to evolve something to get away from the predator. And then maybe think about maybe a lion chasing an antelope or a deer. The deer gets faster to get away from the lion, and the lion gets even faster to catch the prey. Maybe the deer gets even more fast. So they are evolving some things in order to survive better, to get away from the predators. So we're going to talk about those things next. Actually, before that, we have a question. So which of the interactions are beneficial to one species but harmful to another? There are multiple answers to this.